We have two teachings today, and I rather like that one is very old and one is very recent, and they complement each other so beautifully. And when I read a part of each of them to you now, I think you'll really begin to see how each of those teachings bookends our experiences, our personal experiences, and also our shared experiences. So if I return for a moment to the Katha Upanishad, and I hear this, the wise. Well, those of us who would like to understand a little bit more about what it means to be wise, those wanting to have a little bit more sense of meaning and depth in our lives, through sitting quietly in reflection, recognize who they are. You have that chance to recognize who you are, hidden in the cave of your heart, in the depths of your heart where perhaps you don't always or too readily shine a light. You can leave behind the extremes of pleasure and pain. And what that really tells us is that we become less dependent on what is happening to us for our fundamental, stable and enriching sense of self, so that our sense of who am I is less dependent on whether somebody else has praised us, and it's also less likely to be fractured if someone else treats us poorly or badly. We are inclined from this place, moving forward from the cave of the heart, to be a little bit more sanguine, a little bit less vulnerable, and in that to be more attentive, oddly, marvelously, wonderfully, a little bit more attentive, not only to our own well-being, that often concerns us very much indeed, but from that more stable place, we can also be more attentive to the well-being of other people and see how intricately and how inevitably that moves from one to the other. Those who know they are neither body nor mind, that is, that you have a body, you have a mind, but you also, in your are-ness, you are an eternal self. This is the Katha Upanishad again. Know the divine principle of existence. Finding that principle of existence, you also, of course, find the source of happiness. Your happiness, again, is not dependent on those extremes that you cannot always control. It's dependent only on knowing who you are. And in knowing who you are, knowing also that you have the strengths to meet adversity, whether the adversity is in your own life or in the life of another person. That is, you're not living from that more fragile place of the ego or the personality self, although of course we pay attention to that too, but you're moving outwards to the world and bringing the world back into yourself from that place that we might call the cave of the heart. The cave of the heart, which can of course be reached in just a second, in a moment's reflection or in listening to these beautiful, beautiful evocations of the sacred through music that we have every month here, or through poetry or through prayer, bringing us back to the cave of the heart, the place where we can know the illuminating light of the self. And the writer of the Katha Upanishad says that if you grasp this, you will have the gates of happiness opening for you. And I find that last phrase of that prayer, that teaching, I see the gates of happiness opening for you. I feel that this is really something that often in a very clumsy way, and having to learn it and relearn it and learn it in times of adversity and learn it again in times of joy. I really feel that this is something that I want to take into my heart, into the cave of my heart, increasingly, as I live whatever is left of the rest of my life. I see the gates of happiness opening for you, because as I see the gates of happiness opening for you, of course the gates of happiness are opening for myself, and as the gates of happiness are opening for myself, so I too can embody peace, contentment, and happiness that will positively affect you. It is a most exquisite teaching, and how fortunate we are to hear it today, 20th of October, 2013, perhaps 2,500 years, perhaps 3,000 years, since another group of people sat together and needed those words, needed to be reminded that it was not just the fiercest hunters who are most worthy, or those who can get their baby to sleep most easily, or those who can serve the most delicious meals, or whatever the criteria were in those days. No, it is those who know from the depths of their heart what the true meaning of life is, and who can afford a depth and level of gentleness and inclusion of self that allows them also to be gentle to others. And then we move to Mary Oliver, who is one of the most gifted poets of our time. And she starts her marvelous poem, The Summer Day, with that amazing call to us. Who made the world? Because, of course, she's not actually talking about whether we believe in a creator God. She's actually, I think, taking us to a place where we recognize that with our thoughts, as the Dhammapada teaches us, we are constantly making the world. With the ways that we think about the world, we are expressing something outside and beyond ourselves. We bring the world in, we give the world out. Who makes the world on a constant basis, on a daily basis? And then she takes us to that little insect called the grasshopper, which is so easily disguised by the grass, so easily disguised that we could miss it altogether. And very often we do. Very often we miss what is right in front of our eyes. But she wants us also to know it is not just the generic grasshopper, just as you are not the generic human being. It is the particular grasshopper. Just as you are all human beings, as I am, and each of us is also glorious in our particularities. It's an extraordinary gift that she gives us in bringing the sweetness of the sugar in her hand to the grasshopper, and also to us in reminding us what a gift each life is. And that, of course, also means your life. She goes on. I don't know exactly what prayer is, she says. I do know how to pay attention, which is, of course, what prayer so often is simply paying attention, noticing, choosing, bringing ourselves more and more into the flow of existence rather than standing outside and criticizing it or ourselves. I do know how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed. And that word idle is also so important, because what some might call idleness is actually the gift of reflection. It is when we rush by life that we fail to live it. When we give ourselves to life, not in moments of idleness only, but in moments of embracing whatever it is that we are doing, and doing it to the full, whether it's the task of absolute banality or whether we are doing something that would require many, many years of training. Are we giving ourselves to it so it can give itself to us? Tell me, says Mary Oliver, Tell me, what else should I have done? Well, we usually have a long list of worthy things that we ought to be doing, don't we? Often taking us right past the moment in which we could bless this very day, this very existence, this very life. How are we giving time to that? Doesn't everything die at last, she says, and too soon? And there is a too soonness to so much of what we regret. Better to avoid regret and live this life with some awareness, with some consciousness, with some delight, with some compassion while we have it. And then she asks this immensely provocative, glorious question. Tell me again, she's saying, tell me, what is it that you plan to do with this one wild and precious life? Now, the really provocative word there, of course, is wild. You have heard me, you've heard so many teachers, you've heard so many writers, you've heard yourself talk about your life as precious. You have probably much less often heard it talked about as wild. And what could Mary Oliver possibly have been meaning by this? I don't think she means the kind of transgressive behaviours, the kind of narcissistic transgressions that we often associate with wildness, where we were actually inconveniencing everybody around us in order to make some kind of statement that often leads us not to a greater sense of happiness, but sometimes to a greater sense of fragmentation inside ourselves. I think what she's saying, this is just my guess, you might have another guess altogether, but I think that what she is saying is, don't be tamed. Don't be tamed by other people's pitiful ideas about who and what you should be. Don't be smaller than you need to be. Don't be less passionate. Don't be less engaged. Don't love God less just because it might suit somebody else. Don't love your life less because it might suit somebody else. Don't be timid in what you try. Grow into the fullness of your divine and beautiful selves. Claim your spiritual gifts, because if you don't, you give less to the world as well as to yourself. There's a very provocative little teaching in the Psalms, Psalm 82, which says, "You are gods, all of you, children of the Most High." Now, I don't think you need to be too worried by that. It doesn't mean that you are God. But what it might mean is that you are made in some part of yourself, perhaps the part that lives in the cave of the heart, in the image of love. Now, some of you have had a religious formation which told you a great deal about your unworthiness. And I can only suggest that whoever told you hadn't paid nearly close enough attention to Psalm 82. You are gods, all of you, children of the Most High. You could sing it every day. What this means, of course, is that you have the gifts that we associate with divinity. And we can move them away from all our anxiety about ego and credentials and personality self when we remember to tap into them, when we remember that it is not weak to show loving kindness, it is strength. When we remember that when we talk about ourselves disrespectfully, we are disrespecting this gift of life, that we can afford to talk about ourselves to ourselves and to others with real respect and with real gratitude, because that will also form the ways in which we talk to one another. If we took it a little bit to heart, that we each have this one wild and precious life. The emotion that we might feel at this moment of recognition is surely awe. And out of awe emerges a sense of wonder. We have that sense of wonder with Mary Oliver, just looking at the life of the grasshopper. Imagine that each day you gave thanks with a sense of awe for the awesomeness of your particular gift of life. How enthusiastically, with what encouragement, with what gratitude, and with what trust you would then move through your day. So this is my prayer. This is my prayer, that you might find your reflection in this great ocean of awesomeness, that you might find your reflection in the ocean of love. Blessed be.